I perched on a weathered wooden bench outside Riverside Medical Center, twisting my fingers together so tightly that my knuckles blanched. The spring air carried the sweetness of blooming dogwoods, and sunlight glimmered off the glassy hospital windows, but none of that warmth touched me. Inside those walls, my husband, Matthew Hayes, lay in the ICU, battling for his life against an enemy we never even knew was there. Strangers drifted past me, chatting about ordinary things in soft voices, and for a fleeting moment I wished I could be one of them, just another woman soaking in the afternoon sun, laughing about dinner plans or garden projects. But that wasn't me anymore. My world had shrunk to a single hospital room and the relentless chorus of machines keeping him alive. Matthew had always seemed unstoppable. He was the kind of man who could spend 12 hours in his workshop building custom furniture, then come home, throw together dinner, and still have the energy to ask me about my day. And that smile of his, when he flashed it, you couldn't help but believe that somehow everything was going to be okay. He was my anchor, my safe place. Now, watching him fade, I felt like I was sinking into quicksand. Just 8 months ago, we thought we had a lifetime ahead. We'd talked about vacations we couldn't quite afford yet, a bigger house for the kids we still hoped for, maybe even getting a dog. Then one evening, he walked through the door, looking pale, worn down, brushing it off as nothing more than a long workday. But the fatigue stuck around. It deepened into mysterious bruises, nights when he couldn't catch his breath. The doctors gave it a name that felt unreal: autoimmunoplastic anemia. His body was destroying his own bone marrow, shutting down the very system that made his blood. They said without a stem cell transplant, his chances were grim. I tried to stay strong when I was beside him, squeezing his hand and whispering, "We'll get through this." But at night, I broke apart alone in the bathroom, pressing a towel against my mouth to muffle my sobs. Because I knew something Matthew didn't. He didn't have family. He'd grown up in foster care, never knowing his parents, never even certain if he had siblings. And without close relatives, finding a donor was next to impossible. We joined the National Registry, but the doctors didn't sugarcoat it. The wait could stretch into months, even years. Matthew didn't have that kind of time. Earlier today, one of his doctors pulled me aside. His words gutted me. "Claire, we're running out of options." He didn't need to finish the thought. I already knew. So I sat there, tears streaking down my face, swallowed up by helplessness. I was a nurse. My whole life revolved around helping people heal. Yet here I was, unable to save the man I love most. My mind drifted back to the life we'd built, the little wooden house just outside Brookhaven, the rocking chair he made me for our first anniversary, and the note he'd once written that still hangs by the kitchen door. "You are my always." The thought of losing him was unbearable. And still, deep down, a cruel voice whispered that I might have to face it. I hated myself for even letting that thought take root, but grief was already wrapping its icy grip around me. Then, as if fate hadn't been cruel enough, I overheard something, a conversation that shifted everything. I first met Matthew on a night when life still felt light, before medical charts and sterile hospital rooms ruled our days. I had just finished my final exam in nursing school, exhausted but finally free, when my friends dragged me to a little cafe downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old brick place with creaky wooden floors and the smell of coffee soaked into every corner. That's when he walked in. He carried a paper bag from the hardware store, jeans dusted from work, and he had this quiet, easy confidence about him that made you look twice. When our eyes met, he gave me a shy smile and asked if he could take the seat across from me. We ended up talking for 3 straight hours about his love for woodworking, my dream of working in pediatrics, how we both hated olives but adored peach cobbler. When he laughed, really laughed, his eyes crinkled at the corners, and something inside me just knew. From that night forward, Matthew wove himself into my life. He'd show up with little surprises: a jar of honey from a roadside stand, a bunch of wildflowers wrapped in butcher paper, a book he remembered me mentioning once. He had a gift for turning ordinary moments into something special. 3 years later, we stood beneath a sprawling oak tree, promising forever in front of our families and friends. I wore my mother's pearls, and Matthew cried the moment he saw me walking towards him. He was never the type to hide his emotions. He loved openly, fully, without hesitation. After the wedding, we moved into a small wooden house on the edge of town. It was a fixer-upper, and Matthew insisted he could handle it. And he did. He spent weekends sanding floors, building shelves, even crafting a rocking chair that still sits on our porch, holding the memories of countless evenings watching fireflies glow in the Kentucky twilight. Life was good. Not perfect, but full. The only missing piece was children. We started trying soon after the wedding, convinced it would happen quickly, like it seemed to everyone else. But month after month, nothing changed. Doctors told me my body wasn't cooperating, that conceiving naturally might never happen. We tried treatments, hormone shots, endless appointments, even IVF. The first round failed, then the second. Each negative test chipped away at me, leaving me feeling broken, as if my body had betrayed us both. But Matthew never wavered, not once. On nights when I cried until I could hardly breathe, he would hold me tight and whisper, "Claire, this doesn't change how much I love you." He even brought up adoption, talking with such hope about the children who needed homes and how we could still build a family together. I wanted to share his excitement. I really did. There was still a part of me that longed to see a child with his blue eyes and that crooked half smile he wore whenever he was trying not to laugh. After another failed round, I broke down in his arms, sobbing apologies, telling him he deserved a wife who could give him the family he dreamed of. He gently lifted my chin until our eyes met and said, "Claire, I didn't marry you for children. I married you for you. You are my family." That was Matthew. Steady, tender, and endless selfless. He could have been bitter or withdrawn, maybe even resentful, but instead he chose love again and again. Looking back now, I see how those hard seasons prepared us for the storm we never saw coming. The nights we clung to each other through disappointment, the dreams we reshaped together, they became the blueprint for how we survived what was about to hit us. Because when Matthew got sick, our whole world caved in. And still, even as his body grew weak, he tried to be the strong one. He made jokes about the hospital food, teased me for worrying too much, promised me we'd get through this the way we always had. But deep inside, I knew this was different. This was life or death. And I wasn't ready to picture life without him. It began so quietly, we almost didn't notice. He started coming home from the shop earlier, brushing it off with a smile. "Just tired, Claire. Long day, that's all." But the fatigue never lifted. Instead, it deepened, pulling at him more and more each day. Then came the bruises. At first just a few, like he'd knocked into something at work, but soon they appeared without explanation. Dark splotches spreading across his arms and legs. One night I woke to the sound of him gasping for air, clutching his chest, desperate for breath. The nurse in me knew this wasn't something simple. I begged him to see a doctor. When he finally agreed, I expected something manageable, maybe anemia, maybe stress. But after test after test, the hematologist sat us down, his expression far too serious. His words fell heavy, each one sinking into me like a stone. "Matthew, you have aplastic anemia. It's rare, and in your case, it's severe. Your bone marrow is shutting down." I felt the air leave my lungs. Matthew, calm as ever, simply nodded and asked, What do we do? The answer was both straightforward and impossible. You need a bone marrow transplant. Without it, your body can't make blood cells. The best chance is a sibling or close relative. We turned to Matthew, silently pleading, but I already knew. There was no one. Foster care was his only constant, and his family history was a blank page. We signed up for the National Registry immediately, but the doctors were honest. Finding a stranger match could take months, even years. Matthew didn't have that kind of time. The disease advanced rapidly. His skin lost its color, his hands shook when he tried to lift a cup. The man who used to work past midnight in his shop could hardly cross the living room without resting.
And still, he tried to shield me. He joked about the paper-thin hospital gowns, about how he'd always wanted to try the bald look once the treatments took his hair. At night, when he thought I was asleep, I'd hear him whispering prayers, not asking for himself, but for me. I held his hand beside the hospital bed, forcing a smile and whispering, "We're going to beat this." But the truth was, I was terrified. Terrified of losing him. Terrified of waking up alone in that little house. Terrified of a future I hadn't imagined without him. Then came the day the doctor pulled me aside. His voice was gentle, but carried the weight of finality. "Claire, we're running out of options. If a match doesn't come soon, I'm afraid he doesn't have much time." I nodded, unable to form words, tears burning behind my eyes. I'd seen death before. Nurses see it more often than most. But nothing prepared me for the thought of losing Matthew. I stepped out into the courtyard, desperate for fresh air, desperate for anything steady to hold on to. That's when I overheard it. 2 hospital employees leaning against the wall on break, talking casually, not realizing I could hear them. "You know that guy in ICU, Hayes? He looks just like this man out in Silver Creek. Swear to God, it's like seeing double." My heart stopped. Silver Creek, just a 3 hours east, tucked in the mountains. Could it be nothing more than a look-alike? Or could it mean Matthew had family out there? Someone who might be the match he needed? For the first time in over a month, something flickered inside me. Hope. Fragile and trembling, but hope all the same. I stood frozen in the courtyard, their words echoing. "He looks just like this guy who lives out in Silver Creek." I knew the town, had only been once back in nursing school for a community project. Life there moved slower. People waved at strangers. Stories lingered longer. It could have been coincidence. People resembled each other all the time. But something in me whispered otherwise. Matthew had been abandoned at birth, left without answers. Growing up wondering if there was anyone out there who shared his eyes, his smile. I remembered one humid summer night on our porch when he admitted, "Sometimes I think about looking for them. But what if they didn't want me then? Why would they want me now?" His words carried a quiet ache I never knew how to soothe. So he let it go, building a life with me instead, believing that family was something you created, not something you were born into. But now, family wasn't just an idea. It might mean the difference between life and death. That night, I barely slept. I stayed at Matthew's bedside, holding his hand, listening to the steady hum of the machines, and wondering if Silver Creek held the answers we so desperately needed. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow but even. I leaned close and whispered, "I'm going to fix this, Matt, no matter what it takes." The very next morning, I walked into work with fire in my chest and filed for emergency leave. My boss didn't press for details. She already knew what Matthew was facing. She just hugged me tight and signed the papers. Back home, I threw clothes into a bag, my pulse pounding with a strange mix of dread and determination. I didn't even know the man's name, only that he lived in Silver Creek and supposedly looked like Matthew. All I had was a picture of my husband on my phone and the thinnest thread of hope. No plan, just faith that somehow this would matter. Before I left, I stopped by Matthew's room. He was awake, his faint smile lighting up his tired face. "You look like you're about to take on the world," he teased softly, his voice warm but weak. Maybe I am. When he tried to press for details, I shook my head. "Don't worry about it, okay? Just rest. I'll be back before you know it." I wanted to tell him about Silver Creek, about the man who might share his blood, but I couldn't risk raising his hopes only to crush them if it turned out to be nothing. The drive out of Brookhaven felt surreal. Highway pavement gave way to twisting country roads, fields speckled with wildflowers, and finally the soft rise and fall of the mountains surrounding Silver Creek. Crossing the old wooden bridge into town, I whispered a desperate prayer. "Please let this be real. Please let someone out there be the answer." I parked near a little general store and stepped out, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline. The whole town moved at a slower rhythm. Farmers loading feed, an older woman sweeping her porch, children riding bikes down dusty streets. I studied every face, searching for Matthew's sharp jawline, his eyes, anything. Inside the store, I approached the man at the counter, gray in his beard and kindness in his eyes. "Excuse me, I'm looking for someone. I don't know his name, but people say he looks like this." I showed him Matthew's picture. The clerk's eyes widened. "You're probably talking about Jacob Miller. Lives out by the cornfields on Maple Ridge Road. Yeah, he does look like that." My heart leapt. "Could you give me directions?" He nodded, scribbling instructions, and I hurried back to my car. My hands shook on the wheel as I drove, every turn of the road pulling me closer to an answer I'd been praying for. Maple Ridge Road was a cracked strip of pavement cutting through pine woods and open fields. A soft drizzle began to fall, clinging to the windshield, blurring the world around me. Then I saw it. The Whitaker mailbox, paint chipped, white letters faded. The house sat behind it, worn and weathered, framed by corn stubble and muddy tire tracks. A rusty swing swayed in the wind, and somewhere a dog barked. I sat there in the car, frozen. What if I was wrong? What if I was about to embarrass myself in front of a complete stranger? But then I thought of Matthew, his frail hand wrapped around mine, his smile hiding the fear in his eyes, and I forced myself out of the car. The wooden steps moaned under my weight as I climbed them and knocked, 3 times, harder. At last, the door creaked open. A man stood there, taller than I expected, broad but slightly stooped, with messy blonde hair falling across his forehead. And his eyes. My breath caught. They were Matthew's eyes, the same piercing blue, the same shape, the same intensity. He blinked, wary. "Can I help you?" His voice was low, cautious, with a rough edge that belonged to someone who didn't often entertain strangers. With trembling hands, I held out my phone, Matthew's photo glowing on the screen. "This is my husband. His name is Matthew Hayes. People said, you look like him." His eyes widened, and he stared at the picture far longer than I could stand. His face shifted from confusion to disbelief, and then to something almost wounded. Finally, he rubbed the back of his neck and murmured, "Well, I'll be damned." His gaze softened as he looked back at me. "Who are you?" "I'm Claire, his wife." He hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. "You'd better come in." The inside smelled faintly of coffee and motor oil. The furniture was mismatched, floors scuffed but lived in. He motioned towards a chair. "Sit." "You're saying he's your husband?"
he asked, settling opposite me. I nodded, gripping my bag in my lap. He's in the hospital. He's very sick. He needs a bone marrow transplant. They told us he has no family. But then I heard about you. I had to come. My voice cracked under the weight of it. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the picture again before slowly shaking his head. I think he might be my brother. The words hit me so hard, my breath caught. My brother? Jacob Miller, that was his name, nodded. Our mom, she wasn't much of a mom. Had a bunch of kids, all with different fathers. When I was little, she had another baby, a boy. She told me she wasn't keeping him, signed him away at the hospital and left. I was too young to do a damn thing, but I never forgot. Always wondered what happened to him. His voice cracked as he covered his face with both hands. I didn't even know his name until now. My vision blurred with tears. Matthew spent his whole life wondering if he had family. He thought he was completely alone. Jacob's jaw tightened, and then he stood up abruptly. I'll do the transplant. I don't even need to think about it. His voice was firm, unwavering. He's my brother. If there's a chance I can help him live, of course I will. He grabbed his truck keys from the counter and looked at me. When do we go? For a long second, I just stared, stunned. I'd braced myself to explain, to plead, maybe even to beg, but none of that was needed. It was like Jacob had been waiting for this moment his whole life. That evening, we left Silver Creek together, the rain falling harder, streaking down the windshield as his old pickup followed behind me. My chest felt lighter than it had in months. Fear was still there, clinging to me. But for the first time in a long while, it was joined by something else. Hope. Fear never left me, not really. But now it was joined by something steadier. Hope. Hope that felt firm, like solid ground beneath my feet instead of the quicksand I'd been sinking in for months. When we finally reached Vanderbilt, I led Jacob through the bright, sterile hallways until we stood at Matthew's door. Matthew was propped up on pillows, pale but awake. His face lit up when he saw me, then shifted into confusion as his eyes landed on Jacob. For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. Matthew's mouth parted, like he was staring at an apparition. Jacob's voice broke the silence, rough with emotion. I think I'm your brother? Matthew blinked hard, tears rising instantly. My brother? I stood frozen, watching the two of them, strangers just yesterday, yet tied together by blood, lock eyes like they were recognizing something neither of them had ever been able to name. Matthew stretched out a trembling hand, and Jacob clasped it tightly. We'll talk later, Jacob said softly. Right now, I'm here to save your life. The doctors rushed his tests, knowing Matthew's clock was running out. When the hematologist came back with a relieved smile, my knees nearly gave way. He's a strong match, she told us, one of the best we've seen in a long time. I spun toward Jacob, tears already spilling. Did you hear that? You're a match. You can save him. Jacob's face shifted between disbelief and fierce resolve. Then let's do it. When do we start? That evening, the brothers finally had time to sit together. I hovered just outside the door, giving them space. Though their voices carried low and unsteady at first, Matthew's broke when he said, I used to dream about having a brother. I thought it was childish, like dreaming about a house you'll never own. But here you are, real. Jacob chuckled softly, though his voice was thick with feeling. Guess life had other plans. I'm sorry I wasn't there, Matt. I didn't even know. You don't have to be sorry, Matt whispered, gripping Jacob's hand with surprising strength. You're here now. That's all that matters. When I finally stepped back in, Matthew looked at me with wet eyes. I have a brother, Claire. I'm not alone. I kissed his forehead and whispered, You never were. The transplant was scheduled for the next morning. I hardly slept, my mind tumbling through every possible outcome. Jacob, on the other hand, was calm, even cracking jokes with the nurses as they prepped him. "Never thought I'd be giving my bone marrow to a guy I just met yesterday," he teased, then glanced at Matthew with a softer smile. "But I'm glad it's him." The hours dragged, but at last it was done. The procedure went smoothly, and Matthew was moved to recovery, his body already beginning the slow work of accepting Jacob's cells. I sat at his bedside, holding his hand, noticing the faintest warmth return to his skin, the softest hint of color in his cheeks. Jacob came in later, exhausted but content. Matthew reached weakly to grasp his arm. "You just gave me a second chance," he whispered. Jacob's eyes softened. "Guess we're even. You gave me family." I broke then, tears spilling freely. After carrying so much fear and loneliness for so long, I finally felt something else. A deep, quiet peace. Outside, Brookhaven's skyline glowed under the evening sky, and I thought about how life could turn so suddenly, from despair to hope, from loss to restoration, in just a matter of days. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe deeply and believe Matthew might truly survive. And more than that, we had been given something far beyond what we prayed for. The days after the transplant felt like waking into a new world, one where hope carried more weight than fear. Each morning, I searched Matthew's face for tiny victories, a touch more color, a steadier voice, a firmer squeeze of my hand. Jacob stayed close, crashing on an old pull-out chair in the waiting area when hospital rules wouldn't let him stay in the room. He never complained. One evening, I brought him coffee and caught him staring at Matthew through the glass, wonder etched across his face. "He's really my brother," he whispered, as if he still needed to convince himself. Slowly, Matthew regained his strength. One crisp autumn afternoon, he stepped outside for the first time in over a month, shuffling carefully along the hospital garden path while I studied him. "I forgot how good fresh air feels," he murmured, squeezing my hand. 10 days later, we finally brought him home, to our little wooden house on the edge of Brookhaven, with Jacob trailing us in his battered pickup, already woven into our lives. The house felt different now, fuller somehow, like it had been waiting for this missing piece. In the weeks that followed, Jacob became a fixture. He and Matthew spent long evenings on the porch, swapping scraps of memories. Matthew's from foster homes, Jacob's from their mother, their early years, even tales of siblings Matthew had never known. One night, Jacob pressed a worn pocket knife into Matthew's hands, the initials of their father carved into the handle. "It's all I've got left of him," he said quietly. Matthew carried it gently, tears streaking his face in silence. Word spread through Silver Creek, and soon cards, prayers, even casseroles trickled in. Notes from strangers read, "Family is everything. Hold each other close." Their kindness reminded me that goodness still thrived in the world, even in its darkest corners. Several months passed, and Matthew grew stronger. His hair thickened, his laughter returned, and eventually he slipped back into his workshop, slower but still burning with creativity. One evening, he pulled me outside to the porch, where a brand new rocking chair sat waiting, crafted with his own careful hands. "For you," he said simply. I lowered myself onto it, tears blurring my eyes as I rocked gently back and forth, the wood creaking beneath me in that familiar, comforting way. We folded Jacob into our rhythms as if he had always belonged there. Weekend dinners quickly became our little tradition, tables crowded with food, laughter echoing, and that quiet undercurrent of gratitude humming through it all. Every now and then, I'd catch Matthew and Jacob trading these shy, crooked smiles like neither could quite believe the other was real. One late autumn evening, the light spilling gold over Silver Creek, Matthew and I walked side by side down a road lined with flaming red and orange trees. Leaves swirled around our feet as Jacob strode ahead, his laughter carrying back to us while he balanced his best friend's little girl, his niece in all but name, on his shoulders. Matthew gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think being an orphan meant I'd always be alone. But I was wrong. I've got you. And now I've got him too." I looked up at him, feeling those words anchor themselves deep inside me. Family isn't always about blood, Matt, but sometimes it is. And when it is, it's a beautiful thing. That night, we gathered around a small bonfire in Jacob's backyard. The firelight flickered across our faces, soft and steady, while the air held that crisp autumn chill. For the first time in so long, I felt a steady calm, a certainty that we were going to be all right. Life had stripped us bare, broken us down to pieces, but somehow it also stitched us back together in ways we never could have imagined. I rested my head against Matthew's shoulder, listening to Jacob tell stories about the neighborhood he grew up in, stories Matthew had never heard, but leaned toward eagerly. I thought to myself, this is it. This is what healing feels like. Our story had started with loss and despair, but it didn't stay there. It found its way to family, to second chances, to a brother finally discovered and a life renewed. And as I sat there with the fire crackling, Matthew's warm hand wrapped in mine, I understood something I hadn't before. Sometimes life hands you exactly what you've been aching for, right at the edge of losing hope.